What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to Everything in Poderation, because sometimes the internet can just be too much. My name is Colin Sparling, and I am your DM for this show. Other players, please roll initiative to see who does roll call next.
Ooh, I got
12.
a critical 1.
Oh, so you're not on the show. I'm Daly, and I am Elf Star, a priestess and a witch.
All right, and since I rolled a 1, I feel like my intro has to be really bad, right? So hey guys, I'm here on this this podcast. I think, right? I'm here. That's me. That's my name. Oh, my name Robert.
It sounds fake. Like, I've known you for so long, but the way you just... Robert. Yeah, let's go with that. I'm not convinced that's your real name anymore.
My name is Frank.
Mm-hmm.
Just Frank. So Elfstar is like, I feel like that's like baby's first D&D name.
Okay, I'm gonna let you know about some D&D history today, and there's some deep lore behind the name Elfstar, who is a priestess and a witch.
Wait, is this like a being that you didn't make up?
This is someone that what's his name? Charles Chick, James Chick, John Chick. I don't remember him. Mr. Chick.
He's the guy who hates D&D, right?
He hates a lot of things, especially Catholics.
I would
but
assume
definitely
that
D&D players.
He was the inventor of chiclets.
Nope. I know about Mr. Chick through one avenue, and that's a really bad movie where people, it's like about high schoolers, and these two high school girls are trying to get in with the cool crowd, and the cool crowd is a bunch of kids who play D&D, not like smokers or like cheerleaders. Yeah, and they become RPGers, and then they take the like, that's their gateway drug, and then they get into the hard shit, which is LARPing.
Yep. In the steam tunnels underneath the University of Michigan.
Mm-hmm. And then one of the friends has to kill the other friend, and then they just can't talk to each other anymore, like even in normal life. It's really sad. That's why D&D is bad.
She's dead.
This is a comic universe that I would read about where the nerd kids are actually the cool kids.
Okay, it was a comic originally. It was a chick track.
Mm-hmm.
Really?
Yep, a chick track, which is you might have encountered them. If you have those, like at Halloween, the churches sometimes hand out chick tracts instead of candy about like how Halloween is like actually about human sacrifice and stuff, and that it's really bad for us to celebrate it.
Which, let's be fair, is anyone who knows Halloween, am I right, guys?
Yeah.
Of course.
Yeah.
All about that sacrifice.
Yeah.
Wait, back up. It's called a chick track?
A chick track.
Named
there's
after the dude.
Ton of these that are available still to this day and they moralize on various things, like how you shouldn't play RPGs because it's a gateway to Satanism. You shouldn't trust in science because there's little demons on the shoulders of all scientists,
which is true.
And the Pope is a pedophile and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm. Wait, before we go any deeper, Colin,
yeah.
What the fuck are we talking about today? Do you want to introduce this episode?
Yeah, in case you guys haven't noticed, we're talking about Dungeons and Dragons, roll dice and nerdy stuff.
Okay, I got a 14.
17.
I got a 14 too.
I win.
I don't know what this is for, but we rolled. But yeah, Dungeons and Dragons. Obviously all the rage right now. A lot of people playing Dungeons and Dragons on the internet. There's a lot of podcasts about Dungeons and Dragons. There's a long history for Dungeons and Dragons, and Dungeons and Dragons is the cool thing to do. All the celebrities are doing it now. You know, imagine back in the day if I don't know, give me an old actor. James Dean played Dungeons and Dragons. I don't know, give me another. Marlon Brando.
Dick Van Dyke.
You think Dick Van Dyke played Dungeons and Dragons? And I swear to God, he just could have named his character Dick Van Dyke and it would have been great.
Did you guys remember that classic scene in Rambo, like the first Rambo, where after like killing hundreds of people with a machine gun, Rambo was like, great, now I can't wait to get back to my friends and play Dungeons and Dragons. And he looked directly at the camera.
And he winked.
Mm-hmm.
And then you heard
he
the sound of rolling die.
You know, like the only reason he killed all those people, right, was because he rolled really well in initiative.
Yeah, he did a nat 20 on a machine gun check.
Yeah. I mean, obviously, everyone knows that. That's why there's four Rambo movies. Four.
And the reboot that isn't a reboot, and it's called
First
Blood.
Because there was three, and then there was the fourth one, which was the reboot, I thought.
Oh, is that one called First Blood?
No, wait.
Well, it has the word first in it, so it must be the first movie, right?
Yes.
I'm just fucking confused.
Then he runs up the steps, and there's that song that goes like ba 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 ba.
And
that's my favorite
kills
Rambo movie.
everyone.
Oh wait, sorry. I was thinking of The Expendables. Sorry, guys.
Wait. Sylvester Stallone.
Anyways,
plays...
Dungeons and Dragons is the game that was invented by Vin Diesel, who plays in the Fast and the Furious series. And he there's the point in the Fast and the Furious where he gets out of the fast car and he plays Dungeons and Dragons. And that's why
he's furious.
Vin Diesel is not in the second or the third Fast and Furious movie because he's playing D&D, and D&D takes so long that he couldn't be in the second.
That's fair.
Second two movies.
He takes life a quarter turn at the time.
Yep. Quarter turn at a time. And then he went and did Riddick, which this is a completely wrong timeline. But now he's in Ark, guys. He's done playing D&D and doing Fast and Furious, and now he's in Ark 2.
I mean, I think he's still playing D&D. Daly, you want to tell us the actual origin story? I mean, Vin Diesel. I know Gary Gygax is Vin Diesel in a wig.
Right,
but let's pretend Gary is a real person.
He got buff, man. He really got his strength stats up. I'm very impressed. No, okay, so prior to 1974, the idea of Dungeons and Dragons did not exist, but there was a very popular subset of gaming called wargaming, and this was reenacting various battles from like the Napoleonic Wars or even like the big ones, the Great War, World War II, etc. And Gary Gygax and his buddy Dan Anderson were like, hey, you know what? We should make this a little bit more Tolkien. We're both really big fans of Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit, and what if we added fantasy elements to that? So in 1974, the game, the tabletop RPG game Dungeons and Dragons was published by Gygax with a budget of $2,000 for the entire production. And only $100 was allocated for art at the time, which if you're familiar now with D&D, that's like such a cornerstone. Like you can commission artists to just get like just a bust of your character and it's going to run you way over $100.
I mean,
so
to be fair, crazy. Like, I mean, not that this means much, but that's also $2,000 and then also $100 in 1970s money, which is a lot more money than nowadays. But
that's true.
Still not a lot.
Inflation, y'all. Still not a lot.
And consider too, this was the 70s, right? So Lord of the Rings wasn't cool.
No. This was there's a fun story about Gary Gygax's wife. He was he was disappearing into the basement with his buddies all the time, and she was like, you know what? They must be, I don't know what they're doing down there. I think he might be, like cheating on me. He's talking about other women with his buddies and he's avoiding me. And she goes down there one day to confront him. And he's like, hey, so we're making this game. Do you want to play?
And it was a sex game.
And it was emphasis on the Dungeons and Dragons. Yes. No, it was just Dungeons and Dragons, the very first edition as we know it.
I want to know how long the meeting was where they came up with the name Dungeons and Dragons.
There's another fun story, actually. He had many different names in mind, and the reason why we have Dungeons and Dragons is because his I want to say she was like 6 or 7 year old daughter was like, I like that one, do that one, and he's like, okay.
I mean, it works. It's a good name. And I mean, honestly, my favorite part about the name is that everyone calls it D&D now, right? And D&D has that same poetic quality that like cellar door, it just sounds so good to say. Like D&D, it rolls off the tongue super well.
And
It
nowadays,
sounds
you
like
instantly know what you're talking about. D&D.
D&D sounds like a
yes.
product you put on a door to keep it from squeaking.
I think they call it WD-40.
It's close enough.
I know.
Warriors and Dragons 40K.
Warriors and Dragons 40K.
Yes.
I mean, Warhammer's a pretty good name too. We'll admit that. Warhammer it rolls off the tongue pretty easily.
And you know what you're getting. It's all about hammers.
Yeah.
And war.
Just like forging them.
Hammers fighting each other.
I got sledgehammers. I got regular hammers to remove nails. I got ball peen hammers. I don't know. Daly wanted to talk about Forrest Gump during this podcast, so I'm trying to make this into a Forrest Gump reference.
Okay. Y'all ready for me to go into there is a connection between Forrest Gump and Dungeons and Dragons. Do you want to know the connection? The very, very tenuous, tiny spider thread of a connection. Okay, so let's set the scene. This is the late 70s. The satanic panic is upon us, meaning that for some reason, Christian evangelicals and just the general populace were like, you know what? There's probably Satanists among us. They're probably doing shit. They're probably casting spells and burning babies and stuff like that.
A lot of that, isn't that thanks to, thanks to in part by The Exorcist.
There were scary movies were ramping it up and becoming a little more uncomfortably realistic. There were actually genuine Satanist movements like LaVeyan Satanism came into the public eye at the time. But this was kind of the QAnon of the day, where it's like there's a mass conspiracy of Satanists among us, that kind of thing. And it started to come to a head in 1979 when a college student named James Dallas Egbert III, there's 3 of him, he got lost in the University of Michigan steam tunnels. And steam tunnels are going to be a common theme throughout the history of D&D related news stories, unfortunately. And he was down there because he was attempting suicide at the time. And he was later did commit suicide. But his family was like, why would he do this? I don't understand. He was, a brilliant kid. So they hired a private investigator who came to the determination that, he was LARPing in the steam tunnels. And so D&D made him suicidal.
I love mental health understanding from like the 50s on through the 70s.
Oh yeah,
it was just like, he obviously was LARPing it. There's no way it could have been anxiety or depression or anything like that.
Real solid.
Thank God now in the 2020s we finally fully understand and accept mental health as a society, and no one gives you shit for feeling sad.
Yeah. That's a totally, entirely true and undebatable statement.
I mean, we have shock therapy now, guys. It's
it's fine. We have it figured out. But that private investigator named William Deere, he actually wrote a account and profited off of this young man's suicide called The Dungeon Master. And then from there, a bunch of other people wrote books about how, role-playing and Dungeons and Dragons, open you up to like really dark thoughts and curses and suicide. And Tom Hanks, a very young Tom Hanks, I'm talking about, this was in 1982, I want to say. So he was a young man. He was fresh off of Big, or before Big. I don't remember when Big came out, but he starred in Mazes and Monsters, wherein he played a young man that gets lost in some steam tunnels and cannot separate reality from Dungeons and Dragons. And he's like, I have spells, I can fly, it's fine.
No. Did he become a Satanist?
He did not become a Satanist, but you might become a priestess and a witch, according to the 1984 chick track Dark Dungeons, which kind of also built off of this idea that playing D&D will make you like totally lose sight of reality and get really involved in your character. And if your character dies, like Blackleaf, the elven rogue, did, then you'll probably want to kill yourself in real life.
Like Sword Art Online before
it's like Sword Art Online. If you die in the game, you die in real life. That's
so.
Everything is SAO.
A lot of this came down to. I mean, there was like a whole thing that this woman named Patricia Pulling started. She also blamed a D&D spawned curse, a satanic curse that came out of playing Dungeons and Dragons for her son's suicide. So she started a organization called Bothered About Dungeons and Dragons. Bad.
Is this basically Moms
Bad.
Against Dungeons and Dragons?
Yes.
Well,
yes.
I thought it was.
Oh, God.
Isn't Mad drunk driving, right?
Wait, it fits.
Yeah, Mad is drunk driving, but it's also D&D.
This is bad.
Moms Against Dungeons and Dragons. That's great.
And she appeared in 1985. There was a 60 Minutes program about Dungeons and Dragons, in which they did interview Gary Gygax himself, who was just like, it's a game, guys. Like it's the same kind of a game, except it has more fantasy elements than, some of the other wargaming things that people's grandpas were playing at the time. But for some reason, that 60 Minutes segment conclusively, air quotes, connected Dungeons and Dragons to over 20 murders and suicides. So
all fueled by Satanism, if I had to guess.
Yes,
All
Satan is
Satan.
it. They have demons and devils in the actual game, and that's why in the second edition, any mention of demons or devils within the handbook was changed to fiends, so as to try to separate from Satanism. Dun dun dun.
It's so funny. Like that,
Yeah.
people acted like nobody ever played Pretend before this game ever came out.
No.
Well, Pretend
No
before
one-
was like cops and robbers, and cops, there's no problem with cops, obviously.
No,
That's
Never.
a joke. There's quite a problem with cops right now in the country and all around the world, kind of.
Robert subtext.
but- Yeah, but when we decided on this episode, because I guess full disclosure, we don't know when we're releasing this because we have a plan to release it at some point. But with the way the country is right now, we might record other things because the world is the way it is. And I was at least hoping that this episode would be kind of light, airy, a nice little distraction from the real world. But I can't help but make this comparison. Isn't it kind of wild how Christian fundamentalists in the 70s and 80s believe a lot of baseless conspiracy theories, and now 40 years later, same shit, different year.
We've come full
Yup.
D&D. I mean, circle.
Yep, QAnon today, D&D from the 80s. I don't know.
There's always Satanists involved. Apparently, they have a lot of power. Apparently,
Yeah,
dark power.
I mean, it's so funny that when you look at popular culture in like the 60s and 70s, just like the rev up of just horror movies in general, yes, but also demonic themes in horror movies. Like in the 60s, you had things like Rosemary's Baby coming out, which, by the way, still a creepy ass movie nowadays. It's a pretty creepy movie. The Exorcist, which still holds up great. But what's hilarious is if you look back at the history of the Christian church, they weren't even really aware that exorcisms were a fucking thing until The Exorcist came out. And all of a sudden, lo and behold, they have a bunch of cases of exorcisms, which exorcisms were pretty much non-existent in modern history before then.
Mm-hmm.
It's like,
it's-
oh, well, this is a thing that can happen now because this guy said it could, so we better look out for this now. Obviously,
funny
to
how-
explain mental illness, we can just say demons.
Yeah, like pop culture really plants the seed in a lot of people's head, more so than you'd think. When a movie gets really popular, a lot of people, like, Inception got really big about like you can manifest shit in your dreams. And then now we live in a world where like I feel like there's just a bigger rise in like astrology, manifest shit, dream about it.
Yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
we have the modern versions of that with like, like San Junipero, the Black Mirror episode, or there's a new Owen Wilson is back in movies, and he's got a new movie coming out called it's called Bliss, and it's a very Matrix feeling movie, and it's very much based on where technology could just build a world. What if? Ooh.
So you're saying modern conspiracies were started by the Matrix?
Sure.
Maybe. I mean, and in a more apt comparison to bring it all back home, Lord of the Rings got really big in like the mid-aughts, and now like everyone has a D&D podcast.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. It's very true, and I think that is an important part of kind of the history of D&D, but kind of nerd culture in general. And if you listen to our Star Wars podcast, this is going to sound pretty familiar, but there was just a time in like the mid to late 90s into the aughts that's when nerd culture finally started to become acceptable. You know what I'm saying? Like there were less people getting bullied because they were into things that were considered quote unquote nerdy. Star Wars The Phantom Menace comes out, and there are people that are cosplaying and lines out the door and around the corner to get into theaters to see the new Star Wars movie. Soon after that, Lord of the Rings comes out, and just the fantasy explosion happens. And nowadays, or at least a couple years ago, Game of Thrones was the biggest fucking show on TV.
Until it wasn't.
It was, and then season 8 happened, and nobody talks about the show anymore. But yeah, that all that is to say is because of that, people look back at D&D and they're like, wow, this is cool. And, people were playing D&D. 3.5 was huge for a long time. 4 was fine. 5 is great. And that's explosively huge. And now with the mediums like podcasting, which I'm going to throw it to Robert to talk about.
Hello.
We have everybody and their brother making D&D podcasts.
Yeah. I mean, it's weird how much actual play podcasts have gotten. Like, they're just everywhere now. If you at all clicked this episode because you were like, oh, cool, we're talking about D&D, you probably have listened to an actual play podcast. If not, you keep up with some actual play podcasts like Critical Role, The Adventure Zone, Dungeons and Daddies, which, yeah, that's real.
Oh, hell yeah.
Yeah, that includes the guy behind Rocket Jump, Freddie Wong.
Yo.
Yeah, fucking Glass Cannon is a very long-running D&D podcast. And I don't know. I'm really curious as to what it is like what it is in our brains that are like, I want to listen to people do podcasts about D&D, or really any table. Like there's a lot that just do all sorts of tabletop, pen and paper systems. And, part of it is this collaborative storytelling effort, right? It's not like the DM has a sort of a script, but it changes based on what the players do. Right.
Yeah.
And that creates a very interesting form of podcast entertainment that I think it gels well with podcasting in general, because podcasting is improv. Like what we're doing right now, there's no script here that's saying like Robert's going to say this and then Daly's going to say that. It's all improv. And D&D, I've always said this, D&D is improv for nerds. That's all it is.
What do you mean, Robert? I am totally reading off a teleprompter, right?
And that's the secret.
Now.
It was ruined.
You need to speed up your scroll speed, dude. But yeah.
Right now.
But yeah, it's really cool because it's very character driven too, which I know is very appealing for, just fandoms these days. It's like I have X favorite character, so that even if you're not super into the larger story, you can get attached to these like specific characters. And that's what really set Dungeons and Dragons apart from other role-playing games back in the 70s, because it was like you have your entire army was the idea, instead of like you have the entire French army instead of just like one dude going out adventuring and meeting maybe a couple of their guys and then becoming an adventuring party that way.
Yeah, I mean, D&D is all about, it's about experiencing your own hero's journey, right? Like when you think about real war, I mean, like, yes, the soldiers who have died in previous wars, they're all heroes in their own way, but rarely do you hear the story of like that one soldier who took on like 1 billion orcs and survived to tell the tale, that kind of thing. Like that is the kind of feeling D&D wants you to feel with your bard or with your fighter or with your wizard, you know?
Yeah, I mean, and the hero's journey is a tale as old as time itself, as old as fiction itself. And it's so funny how that's sort of translated into video games later on, but D&D as a show, it's kind of like radio is making a comeback in a weird way, where like back in the 50s, you know, when in the 40s and 30s, radio shows were huge because
you listen
radios
to
were the
the
only thing people had.
talkies.
Yeah, you listen to the talkies and the radio shows like War of the Worlds, which, by the way, people thought War of the Worlds was fucking real at the time.
People freaked out.
People freaked the fuck out because the radio was telling them that War of the Worlds was a thing. And so now you fast forward to today and it's come like full circle where podcasts are basically radio shows. You're going out of your way to listen to talk shows, and D&D podcasts in a way are also talkies or like radio shows. So, and that D&D already in itself is telling a story, and you're basically just putting a mic in front of those people telling that story. So it's also really easy content to make at the same time, you know?
Oh, hard disagree.
Well, it's not easy content. What I'm saying is like, you're already doing D&D anyway. So you're shoving a mic in there, and yeah, you still have to have people that know how to put on a show. Sure. But you know, it's something that, you know, it's like D&D that makes so much sense, you know, listen to other people's adventures.
Right.
You know,
I mean, Daly and I can speak to this. We've DM'd. It's not easy DMing because like the for every hour that you spend like quote unquote playing the game, you probably spend at least 3 to 5 hours setting shit up, preparing for like all sorts of situations, doing the really boring numbers management stuff, you know?
Yeah.
So honestly, kudos to the people who do, like, especially the DMs who do the weekly podcasts, because that's a hell of a schedule, man. Like, that's
you're a
tough.
god. You're a god that has to calculate out everything. Because there is math involved, y'all, when it comes to like people's hit points and the likely, oh no, wait, I gotta fudge the numbers here because this is gonna be too easy. You gotta, not only are you just generally improvising as you give voice to every other NPC that your players run into, but you also have to kind of, you know, be able to deviate from your own plan if things aren't going very well, because, you know, it might not be exactly what you imagined it to be when you put it down on paper.
Mm-hmm. And what makes it even harder for podcasts is, on top of all that, you need to have a good story with good characters. Because if you don't, like, even if you do everything else right, but your story is really boring, no offense, you're not going to like get a lot of people listening. Because at its core, like Colin was saying, a D&D podcast or any tabletop pen and paper RPG podcast is about the drama or the comedy, you know, the story shit that matters.
Yeah, very much so. I don't know. When I heard like people were doing D&D podcasts, I was like, you know, that's such a fucking good idea. That's such an obvious, like, wow, why did nobody do this earlier? And I feel like too that like from my time when I first heard about D&D, which is when I was like super young, to now, where it's just like absolutely exploded. It's just so crazy to me that so many people, like even the most casual of people now, are just like, oh yeah, I listen to D&D podcasts. It's like perfectly whatever. When those same people would have, like, years ago would have been like, oh my god, D&D, what's that? Is that a board game? Hello?
Yeah. I mean, like that's the most colloquial way to describe it, is it's a board game, but like it's super not a board game, you know?
When I was young, my uncle told me about D&D when I was like 5 years old, and I was like, oh, is it a board game? Because on his table I saw miniatures. And like I was like, I just assumed it was a board game, but he's like, no, it's like a pen and paper thing, and there's math involved, and you're like making up a lot of it. And I was like, what? And I still didn't even grasp it until I played it for the first time. I was like 14. Do you guys have like a similar first experience?
Man, I wish I knew about D&D and just general tabletop RPGing back in like high school, because like me and my friends would like make up stories with characters in a fantasy setting, and we would like pass around papers and be like, and then this happened, and then this happened, and then I don't know, we didn't even think about dice at the time, but that would have been a good way to facilitate. It's like, okay, this, or this could happen. Let's rock, paper, scissors for it.
Right.
So I think I had that natural draw to it, but instead I just did video games and JRPGs later on when I had access to that instead. But I have gotten into D&D here in the last couple years thanks to cool friends like these losers right here, and had a real good time playing. Yay.
Yeah, I mean, I only learned about D&D in college for me, so I was like, what, 19-ish? But I like it a lot, and just that it's D&D or most pen and paper RPGs, because Daily, remember, we played Lasers and Feelings, which is very silly.
That was fun.
Very fun.
Very silly.
Oh yeah, I forgot about that.
Yeah, would recommend, hey, play Lasers and Feelings if you're feeling it. It's pretty fun. Really easy to pick up too. But what they are just guidelines for storytelling, collaborative storytelling specifically, right? And you know, it's always tough to find the balance for it, and this is what I love about with podcasts is there's a different tabletop podcast for everyone. I think a really common distinction I like drawing is, I believe, Critical Role, right, the Matt Mercer one, is a lot more rules based, and like the numbers are really in the spotlight, and it's very technical, and it's also a lot more dramatic and serious, right? You know, it's truly the drama type D&D show, and the people can be funny, but it's definitely like you're here for the story.
Yeah.
Whereas one like the Adventure Zone, done by the McElroy brothers and their dad, that is like, they commonly joke, you know, we try to follow the rules, but we always fudge them up because we don't know the rules. You would be so frustrated by that show if you were like, but they didn't even factor in the +2 from the greatsword and shit, because they don't give a shit about that. They're just there for like the goofs and the story, right? And they're so that like, and that I think is a good reflection of the so many different ways to play D&D, because like, you know, I've DM'd a lot of campaigns. I've fudged numbers for sure. You know why? Because it ended up being funner at the end of it. But that's just how I like to play it.
Robert.
Funner. But for others, they're like really hardcore, like, have you factored in all the numbers? You know? And it's just a good reflection of how malleable pen and paper shit is.
Yeah, I think that's the best part about it is D&D. Even if you're playing D&D, you don't have to be playing D&D, if that makes sense. If you want to play, I don't know, Avatar: The Last Airbender, the tabletop game, you just take D&D rules and you kind of mold that around the universe and see what applies and what works.
I think there's also Avatar: The Last Airbender tabletop rules.
Is there?
I think.
News to me if there is.
I don't know if those are official, but yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm sure there's like a fan-made version. There's a fan-made.
Yeah, there's going to be a fan-made version of everything. Star Wars fans, there's going to be fan-made. Let's explore Tatooine. There's Naruto ones. There's Bleach ones. It's like, if there's a universe, it exists. It's one of those Rule 34 dealios, right?
Yeah,
but
and the funny thing is, there was D&D is obviously heavily inspired by Tolkien, aka Middle Earth, aka Lord of the Rings. But there wasn't
name is Lord
actually.
Of the Rings. His name is the Lord of the Rings.
Tolkien, also known as Lord of the Rings.
He is the Lord. There wasn't an actual like D&D style Lord of the Rings role playing game until well after D&D was already a thing. And at the time they called it Middle Earth role playing, I believe. I don't even think it was official. I'd have to look this up.
Strap on your Hobbit feet, y'all.
Yeah, I don't even know if it was officially licensed. It was just Middle Earth role playing.
Yeah, and I mean the thing is too, there have been a lot more official role playing games that have gotten really big too. I would argue partially because of Tolkien and D&D becoming big, but also just these podcasts making it really big. Because, you know, I've come across like Apocalypse, Powered by the Apocalypse. That's a format that is used by like all sorts of games, but it's essentially based on 2d6 instead of a d20. There's Pathfinder, which is basically D&D 3.5 if it kept going in that direction instead of D&D V5. And then Pathfinder split off into Starfinder, which I hear is just okay.
Is that like sci-fi-esque?
Yeah, it's space. It's space Pathfinder.
You find stars.
Yes. And there's so many systems that can fit your needs or that you just want to play with. And then there's all the one-sheeters like Lasers and Feelings. This is a one-sheeter. It's just like a one page of rules. Just read them real quick and you get it. There's also like Drunken Bear Fighter is another one where you just get your characters get drunk and fight bears.
I remember like trying to, it was like we just had like an hour and a half and we were like, let's just play something that we can all play. And it was like, do we want to fight bears or do we want to go to space and talk about our feelings? And I in the end, space and feelings won out, but I'm sure there's occasions where the drunken bear fighting would be most appropriate.
Absolutely. I just want to kind of riff off that point for a second too, where I remember the first time someone had told me a story about D&D, right? And the way in which you talk about D&D when telling someone else the tale of what you experienced, it's told from the first person perspective. Like, I did these things, right? Yeah, so like, Robert, fucking wrestled this bear and then I like rolled to fucking tie it up and carry it back to get some sort of bounty or something. Like, somebody was talking like that. I was like, what do you mean you did that? Like, you mean like your character? Like, you played in this game? Like, yeah. Like I fought a gigantic werewolf and and I sliced its head off and I'm like, oh, like how do these things happen in this game? I don't understand until I played myself.
And you did fight a gigantic werewolf. You did not behead him though.
That's true. I did. I don't even remember what I did to him. I think I hit him with a butter knife, or was that someone else?
No, that was Zach's character. Stabbed him with a butter knife.
Ah, right. But yeah, so the ownership over the characters is amazing.
But couldn't you extrapolate that to like all games in general? Like both, real life sports games, but then the video game, like even if you're playing a character like Geralt, like when you slay a big beast and you tell your friend about it, you're not like, oh yeah, Geralt slayed this beast. It's like, no, I played as like I was Geralt and I fucking killed that beast. It was great. Or with soccer, it's not like you say, oh, my foot scored a goal.
Oh,
dude.
yeah.
It's like I scored the goal.
Yeah, well, I should clarify. So this was at the time when I thought that D&D was just a board game. So here I was thinking, like, you rolled this dice, you moved on a board, and then, you were told like, you were fighting a werewolf. But I was
you got like the pre-built
level of
characters where it's like Colonel Mustard did this.
Right. And so, like, I was impressed by the level of detail in which they were telling, like, I did a front flip backflip off the wall and landed on top of this goblin's shoulders and then ripped its head off. Because I didn't know that's the way the DM explained it to me. I thought it was just like, no, you landed on the space and they have it so detailed that they have a card where you read this shit.
For sure.
That's how detailed it is.
Without that same kind of like creativity and flourish that you can personally put on things, it's like instead of drawing a card and being like, oh, I can, slice into the werewolf, it's like I can I remember I had this butter knife with me that I picked up in a totally different place. Maybe it's made of silver. Can I try to stab this gigantic werewolf with it? And it's like, go ahead.
Yeah, and that's one of my favorite things about these pen and paper RPGs is that when you compare them to any other medium, right, like a movie, anyone can watch a movie and walk away with a very similar, if not the same experience, right? With D&D, even if all three of us went to a different, like our different group of friends and had like different people making different characters, but we all played the same campaign, like if we all played Curse of Strahd or something, right? We would all come back here to this podcast where we're all meeting around the big table and we could tell the stories about how we beat this boss or how we figured out that puzzle, but it would probably be radically different, or at least there would be minor differences. You know what I mean? Because who you're playing with, you're creating this space and time where it's something that only you're experiencing, only you and your friends are experiencing it in that moment. It's really hard to recreate that. And that might also be why podcasts are so cool for this, because it's like peering into a moment in time where these people are creating an experience that only they are, feeling and doing, but you can now listen in too. It's very voyeuristic in a way.
Yeah,
Ew.
it's basically broadcasting the whole you had to be there experience.
Mm-hmm.
And that, I mean, people love that. It feels like you're part of a club, like you're part of the circle,
The secret circle where
and
we do Satanist things.
Yeah, and D&D stories are always so much fun to talk about. Like, they're so ridiculous. I'll never forget my first, like, memorable moment in D&D, which was, I think it was like 14 or 15. I was playing with my cousin and my little brother and one of my cousin's friends. And what had happened was I rolled a cleric, but I rolled really shitty on my gear. So
Nice.
I had a mace, but then all I had for a shield was a buckler. So it's just like a shitty little buckler. And I remember one of the other characters we were playing with, he was a pickpocket. So he was like pickpocketing some innocent person on the street in the middle of this town. And I was like, oh, well, I rolled to see him and I ended up seeing him because my perception check was good. And I was like, I'm going to sprint at him. I'm just going to like dash at him and tell him to stop what he's doing, like pickpocketing. The one. And so he's like, yeah, so my cousin's like, okay, so basically what you do is you pull up your buckler and you pull it up so high that you're covering your eyes and then you blindly dash at him. And then
that's the beauty of it.
And then he trips you. And then as you trip and fall, you pull down the pants of some innocent bystander, and while they're exposed, the guy that you're going after gets away. Yeah. So I'll never forget that.
Yeah, and I'm sure if you've played D&D, you probably have a fun story like that too, right? And that's, I don't know, I think that's kind of magical. That's something that you won't get out of an Assassin's Creed,
Yeah. Video games don't quite make it to that level of creativity. It definitely fills some of the role-playing hole, and I think that's why maybe D&D has become so prolific as it is now, is because we've already kind of done D&D light through playing mainstream RPGs. Everyone knows Skyrim. It's like, oh, this is like Skyrim, but pen and paper. And while that's kind of a reductive comparison, it's still like a good starting point. The same way that we were talking about, once the Lord of the Rings movies came out, fantasy became more normalized because it was accessible, because people knew like, oh yeah, elves, Legolas, dwarves, Gimli, etc.
Yeah, and I think one other thing I like about the way the internet's interacting with D&D and tabletop in general is that it's never been easier to play D&D with friends. I mean, especially right now because of the pandemic, but just in general via the internet. Like just set up a Zoom call, set up a Discord server, even Skype works if you have to use it. And that's kind of all you need to start playing a game of D&D. I mean, obviously the DM needs to set up the world and all that shit, and everyone needs to make their characters, but you don't have to be in the same space around the same table anymore. Obviously that experience is better. That's what I would prefer. But the fact that you can just do it from the comfort of your home, from the comfort of your desk, is really, I don't know, it's a great thing that the internet has done for D&D,
Accessibility. You don't even have to buy like fancy die. Like you can just Google like roll a 20 and it'll do that for you on Google.
Yeah, you just need a computer and an internet connection, and you can play D&D, which is especially good in a time like now, because we're in the middle of a pandemic.
Yeah. And I mean, there's also those tools like Roll20, great tool, right? Or map tools, or even like D&D, Wizards of the Coast themselves. They did, what is that, like D&D Beyond, where you can like make your character, like you have an account and you can create your character on the account, and then like you join games via D&D Beyond, and it's all like tied to your account. And that's, I don't know, that's cool.
I think, Robert, you're kind of like playing into something too, that I think overall D&D is just cool now. It's the in crowd. Cool people play D&D, and a lot of people are getting into it because of that. And so like, why do you guys think D&D is so cool now, and like why we're getting so much D&D media and stuff like that?
It's okay to be a nerd.
Honestly, I do think that's the biggest one.
Yeah.
I think so too.
It's less about like having a niche interest, and I think D&D has now just become more of this is something fun to do with your friends.
Mm-hmm. And I mean, because we live in a world now where, I mean, even back in the 80s when it was, the jocks versus the nerds, there was always that mantra of like, but the nerd is going to be your boss in the future, right? That is more true than ever because the nerds rule the world. Fucking Mark Zuckerberg, Jeff Bezos, fucking
Musky
Jack
boy.
Dorsey, yeah, Elon Musk. Like the nerds they're not just your boss. They literally run the world. If you own a smartphone, it's because nerds. You know what I mean?
Yep.
So being a nerd has been cooler than ever because now nerds are like the modern day, oh, you're going to grow up and you're going to make the smartphone too, and with that just comes nerdy things are cooler now. Like it's, I mean, it's cool to lift weights, get fit, get fucking yoked and be a pro athlete and football man or whatever. But it's also kind of equally as cool now to like D&D, to like Star Wars, to like Lord of the Rings,
I mean, ¿por qué no los dos? We got Mr. Vin Diesel and Joe Magliano.
Famous for his role in Arc 2.
Yes.
Yeah,
Arc 2 man, and what was he in? True Blood man, who was also Big Buff man. Both big D&D players.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think the big reason what it all stems from is like with the advent of the internet, right? And then eventually we get into like smartphones and things like that. I think a lot of the acceptance of nerddom actually stems from the general availability of information, right? Because at a base level, the idea of being a nerd, especially back in the day, was like, a lot about things, a lot of trivia, a lot about, I don't know, engineering, something you just know a lot about, right? And so like now that there's such an availability of information, everyone base level could be considered a nerd because they know a lot about one thing. You know what I'm saying? Because now it's the idea of being a nerd is now attached to some other noun. Like I'm a sports nerd. I'm a video game nerd. I'm a Nintendo nerd. I'm a music nerd.
But we don't say anime nerds because those are weebs.
Yes. There's its own word for it.
Otaku, thank you very much.
Oh, right.
Yeah. But no, I mean, and that's why I think that, things like D&D are cool now. And that's also because of the internet, because, back in the day, people like to talk about, people are just on their phones all the time. They're so disconnected from each other. They'll be sitting in the same room and just tapping with their thumbs on a screen. And now we have stuff like D&D that is very personal and very like interacting with people and creating a story together and very social. And I think people more than ever kind of yearn for that sort of thing, especially in a pandemic too.
Yeah.
Please, someone socialize with me.
Oh, we're not good enough for you? Is that what this is right now?
Yeah. More people socialize with
first,
me,
folks.
Please.
We're not good enough we're not good enough for daily.
No, but I am also really excited about the future of D&D, right? Because it's only going to get more accessible and I think cooler, right?
Yeah.
I mean, for one, there's that new D&D thing coming out, that new campaign or something daily, right?
There's a book. There's a booklet. It's Candle something. I couldn't find it. Twitter wouldn't load, but I've seen it around on Twitter.
Yeah. So there's that. So there's always going to be a new campaign or a new rule book to play with, right? But there's also like obviously going to be more podcasts for sure. I ran into one yesterday called Not Another D&D Podcast. So even the podcast world is becoming self-sentient.
They realize.
Yeah, self-aware.
They're becoming self-aware.
But then there's also video games. Funny enough. I mean, like back in the day, right? There was Baldur's Gate 1 and 2. And today there's Baldur's Gate 3. Which is, I mean, there are a lot of other CRPGs that are very D&D focused or based. But, what's fun, what I really like about Baldur's Gate 3 is the story behind it, right? Because Larian Studios, one of my favorites, they make, Divinity 1 and 2, fantastic games, which are basically D&D, but not D&D. And then Wizards of the Coast were like, hey, do you want to make Baldur's Gate 3? Do you want to make D&D? So Baldur's Gate 3 it will, when it's done, probably be the most faithful recreation of Dungeons and Dragons in a video game format, which is very exciting.
You can throw whatever you want to throw. If you have it on your person, you can throw it. You can shove your friends.
Who throws a shoe?
You know, I can live out my fantasy of wanting to throw buckets at everybody. It's going to be great.
Mm-hmm. Oh, and even cooler, I don't know if they're implementing it, but in Divinity Original Sin 2, they have that like DM mode where you can create your own story in the game and then invite your friends and play it through the Divinity system. If they implemented that in Baldur's Gate 3, which I don't know if they will, but if they do, that's basically a competitor almost to Roll20, to D&D Beyond, you know?
Yeah, so it sounds like what you're saying is D&D is dying. It's going to go away within like the next 2 or 3 years.
Mm-hmm.
The economy's really faltering for it.
Yeah,
I don't think we're going to be seeing D&D in any sort of shape or form in maybe
no, and it's definitely not going to, you know, move on to new, never before seen mediums like television. No. I'm pretty sure that that whole TV live action project that's being helmed by the director of the John Wick series is totally going to crash and burn. But there is Dungeons and Dragons based TV series in the works, which just to me sounds like fantasy series, which we know we're getting a Lord of the Rings fantasy series as well. It's almost like fantasy is gonna be a thing in the next couple years.
I mean, fantasy and sci-fi are already starting to explode on TV. I mean, a lot of that can be attributed to the success of Game of Thrones,
Vampire Diaries.
I mean, if we're looping sci-fi in, dude, I think that's exploded on TV for a while now. You got Star Trek. I mean, mainly Star Trek, but also Battlestar Galactica. Everyone wants that. Fucking the one that was canceled after one season, Firefly, you know?
Yeah, but I mean, Game of Thrones was just explosive. I mean, it looped in everybody, like even people that were like wouldn't even consider themselves into that sort of thing.
And it did have dragons in it and dungeons
and sex.
Right.
And sex. Yeah, lots of the three of those just constantly combined.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I think like the series with Lord of the Rings and then all just the fucking baker's dozen worth of Star Wars series we're about to get on Disney Plus. Like we're just being inundated in it, and it's great. More people are getting into nerdy shit, and it's awesome.
Yeah. I mean, I think the more people who watch that kind of stuff, like even if you would call them quote unquote normies, right? If they watch more of that, they're going to be a little more open-minded to like D&D. Cause I totally get the aversion sometimes to D&D. Cause it's like, oh, you guys are just playing Satanism. Pretend. Well, not only that, but just like, oh, that's fucking lame, dude. Why would you just like pretend to be an elf? You can like go play Witcher 3, you know, like they're video games now, man. And you know, in some ways I get it. Like some people need the video game to create the world for them and then they can explore it. But I really do encourage more people, if you haven't played D&D, just play with it. Even if you're not a very creative or imaginative person, it's a good way to flex those creative muscles and to just let your imagination run free as if you were a child again. And a box could be your fort.
Can we make box forts a thing again?
In D&D you can.
Just in real life, I need a box. I need to go. I'm going to go find a big box, guys.
Yeah.
Bye.
Daily, all you got to do is not pay your rent and you'll be in a box fort all you want.
Oh, that sounds exciting. That's a bonus. I can
also very real.
Whoa.
Also help.
Also help me. I live in a box.
But yeah, D&D is just I just love the general acceptance now of nerddom that we have. It's something that, you know, the old head nerds especially be like, yeah, back in my day, you know, I would get swirled in the school bathroom because, you know, I wore a Lord of the Rings shirt and people didn't like that.
Did that happen?
With swirlies or
no, to you,
Lord
Colin,
of the Rings?
Did you get bullied for liking Lord of the Rings?
I don't think I ever got bullied for liking Lord of the Rings, but I did get bullied once because I like to wear band shirts. And when I was in middle school, somebody gave me shit for
Someone
it.
Didn't like your band?
It was Metallica. Like one of the most mainstream bands in existence.
The most baseline band. It's like, hey, fucking sucks.
Yeah, they're like, so fucking, like, you got lyrics on the back, you fucking weirdo. I'm like, what is your problem? Do you not like music? Do people not like music?
Music is lame. Who likes music?
Who fucking likes things? Wow.
Did
fucking
he
weirdo?
Did that bully commit assault and battery?
I don't know. He's probably doing some dead end job in my podunk hometown.
Oh,
I'm
no.
sure.
Maybe he's playing D&D with his buddies on the weekends.
Yeah, maybe he's a nerd now too.
Were you bullied because you liked D&D or some other nerdy thing? Write it into us and let us know your story. We will put that person on blast.
And I think this is a good time to reveal that we are starting our new D&D podcast next week, and we're calling it I Can't Believe It's Not Pathfinder.
Oh my god.
Right, guys? Yep. We're doing a D&D
I thought it was going to be
podcast.
something involving the name Grundle because you name everything Grundle.
And I hate
I
it.
haven't named a D&D character Grundle, but I did name my Animal Crossing character Grundle.
And the island.
No, I named that one Enya. Like the capital letter N with the squiggle over it.
Oh, you did, didn't you? Man.
Oh, Enya. But yeah.
I didn't mean to cut you off. That's Enya, right?
No,
that's
Goat.
Yeah. That's right.
No, Enya is the sail away, sail away, sail away. Anyway.
That's what I'm going to do now.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'm going to sail away and start signing off this podcast unless you guys had anything to add.
I just want to say TM on I Can't Believe It's Not Pathfinder.
Oh, please don't steal.
Yeah,
Do not steal.
TM.
Original is mine. Don't steal.
What's your okay, real quick. What's your class of choice? D&D. Go.
Sorcerer or rogue.
Druid. I want to talk to animals.
I was like the battle cleric, only because I couldn't play a proper battle mage in 3.5.
Mm.
Yeah, I would play battle mage. Like, you can be a
God.
cleric, you have to do like religious shit and all that. And I'm like,
Okay.
why? I just want to cast spells and hit things.
You could do paladin and then be an oathbreaker.
Oh, I learned
Yeah,
something
you
today.
piece of shit, Oathbreaker.
Was are paladins hard to play? I always told paladins were hard to play.
Well, paladins are annoying to play because they have to be lawful good because you believe in a god or whatever. But then you could just say, actually, fuck that, and you break your oath, and you get weird different bonuses.
I just want to be Gandalf. I just want to be a wizard with a sword. Okay. All right.
Fair.
Good. All right.
He's my favorite Star Wars character.
Thank you so much for listening, everybody. Write into us what your class of choice is, and also if anyone bullied you for liking D&D, let us know. We'll put them on blast.
Emails and socials down below.
Yeah, emails and socials down below. everythinginpod@gmail.com, at everythinginpod on the social medias. Hope you guys enjoyed the show. Hope you're having a good 2021 so far. Minus the whole coup thing. Because that's probably
D2021.
Yeah.
Oh.
D2021. Thanks, everybody. This has been Everything in Poderation. Bye.
I'm surprised. I feel like cats walking on you is like the thing you need to go to sleep.
Like, I do
Were they
need
sleeping on
to
your
have a
face?
cat nearby, but Mango was like, hey, I caught and killed this stuffed mouse and I need you to look at it.
Mm.
And I'm like,
Oh my
okay,
God.
I looked at it. I looked at it 5 different times during the night. And then Mako needs to be in a certain position and he will paw at you and try to move you until you are out of his way.
Mm.
And then
Oh my God.
Nala's weird and way too heavy to be doing the things that she does. And she licked my eyelashes and it was weird for everyone
Nice.
involved.
Nice.
You thought she was doing good by licking your eyelashes. She was cleaning
She
your
thought-
eyelashes daily.
She was helping, right?
The eyelash eating cat.
That's
A
her.
horror novel by Roald Dahl.
By Stephen
Roald
King.
Dahl.
Oh, I was going. That does sound like that would be like up his alley,
Roald
though.
Dahl of all people.
I would believe it.